preparation for this week, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the fundamentals of HTML, particularly to help us understand a new function that was introduced to us last week, and we may use a little bit more this week, the document.write function inside of JavaScript. And I'd mentioned to you guys that to try to avoid using it if you could, and I wanted to give you a little bit more in-depth reasoning as to why that was and what it is good for and versus what we've been doing in the past. But in order to understand that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the HTML page itself. So as you see here, one of my templates, we've got our main sections here, and the browser downloads the HTML page and renders it in the browser. And the way that it does that is it just reads straight through it, and it takes the sections as it gets to them and then does what it's supposed to do with each section. So the first one it gets is the head, does what it finds in there. For example, it sets the character set, sets the title, saves any styles into memory, and then runs whatever scripts you have stored in the scripts. If you have functions in there, it saves those into memory so that you can call them later. If you've got just straight JavaScript in there, it runs that JavaScript immediately. That's why when we put in those alert boxes and other things right in there without being in a function, they pop up immediately when the page loads. And then after it's done with the head, it moves into the body. And if you have any HTML in the body of the page, this is when that gets rendered and puts it out on the page. And then once it has loaded everything into the browser, we have what's called a static HTML page. And in this class up to this point, we have been finding ways to take the static HTML that's loaded in the browser and change things here and there using what's called DOM manipulation, or basically manipulating the document object model of the HTML. And what that basically is a fancy way of saying you're going in, finding the HTML by its ID and changing it. So that's more or less how it works. So to get a little bit of a more in-depth understanding of everything I've just said there, let's go ahead and add a little bit of HTML into this page. And based on what I just said, everything gets run, all the stuff runs through the head, and then the next thing that it loads is the body. And as we have typed in here some basic HTML that I've created, that HTML gets loaded over in the browser, and there it is. It's static HTML. Once the browser's loading it, nothing else happens. You're done. We can also write all of this HTML inside of the script, and that's where the document.write command comes in handy. The document.write basically allows you to write HTML directly into the body or into the document of the HTML. So we can actually recreate all of this HTML or recreate it, writing it inside of JavaScript. So I've written an example of what this HTML would look like had we written it inside of the JavaScript section here. And you'll notice here that we have what looks like two identical pages. Is basically the same page written twice, once from the script section and once from the HTML section. If I come in here and write HTML here, and if I come in here and write JS here, you'll see that I wrote the one in JavaScript, and then after it finished writing those, it wrote the next one. Basically, it rendered what was in the body of the text. Now this seems pretty cool, but it can get in the way and get a little tricky for you, especially if you thought that you could use the document.write to do some of it and use strict HTML or static HTML inside the body to do other pieces of it. And you'll notice here that because of the order that everything got read into the page, they're basically come across as two separate pages. Now, in order to kind of show you guys that it is possible to kind of mix these two concepts a little bit, let me show that to you real quick. So something we have not really talked about in this class is that we can actually have a script tag within the body and run JavaScript in the body. And the question you ask, why would you ever want to do that? Well, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that unless you're using the document.write and you need to place it in a specific place. For most of the stuff that we've been doing, leaving the script inside of the head tag keeps things well organized. We got all of our functions up there, and it's just a good place to put things. But if we were using the document.write, say, and we wanted to output this same string, we wanted to generate that at load time dynamically, and there might be particular reasons for doing that. You could recreate this HTML in using JavaScript, and as you've probably noticed and guessed, why I've done this 1 through 5 here is because it's a great use case for some of the scripts that we've been doing in the past week. So if I go ahead and delete out this Java or this HTML here, you'll notice over here, and let's go ahead and get rid of this here too, so we see we're no longer, we just have the one page up here. So now we've got our script tag inside of our body that has a loop that's basically using the document.write to spit out some stuff here. And you notice I started at 0 here. This could have been 15, and it makes it real easy to use JavaScript to build out your page. But the end result of this page is still just a static HTML document. It's not the same kind of a manipulation that we've been doing with the get element by ID type things, and so it's a different function for JavaScript than what we've been doing up to this point. And just for consistency, let's change that back to 1 because that's what we were doing before. So that's one reason that you would use the document.write. And that's useful. This would be great. It's spitting it right out. And like I said, this particular JavaScript function is good if you're just wanting to build the HTML, the static HTML, in a different way than just manually writing it into the Java or into the body here. It's particularly good if when the page loads, you want the page to basically render slightly different. So based on who's asking for the page, maybe you need it to render these, you need 10 of these instead of 5 of these, and those kinds of decisions that you make about your document. And so that is useful, but it isn't the same kind of thing we've been doing the rest of the semester, and this can actually get you into trouble if you use it incorrectly, and that's why I kind of recommended against using it at this stage in our learning of JavaScript. And let me show you real briefly what I mean by that. Say that we wanted to we thought we were going to run this document.write, and because we wanted to create, say, our multiplication tables, that is your assignment for this week, and you thought that, well, let's go ahead and just write a function same way that we've been doing it, and we'll use this function to use a loop to spit out all of our JavaScript. And let's just say that we're going to use all of our times tables, and we'll use the document.write in here. And just for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to put a string in there so that we can know what happens. And then I need a button, obviously, to call this. And we'll just call it test for the sake of time. So I've got my button in here. And of course, if we want my button to call the JavaScript, we have to give it an onClick function, and we called an onClick attribute, and we called our function test. And so here we have this. And so if we were to click this button and this runs, it's probably not going to happen what you expect to happen. You notice it got rid of everything else that I had in there. And even though I had used the document right down here and I generated everything, this button ran after everything had loaded into the page. And so basically what we're noticing here is that when you use the document.write during the loading of the page, and when you use it after the page is loaded, it kind of behaves slightly differently. In this case, it starts the page over again and basically undoes everything that you did before, which can become a problem if you don't understand why it's doing that. And so that's why, basically this document.write function is useful for different types of things we've done in the past. Now, that being said, it may be useful for writing our multiplication times tables this because we're just creating an HTML document. We're not going to be using this to get user input. We're not going to be getting this to ask the user input to make changes to the page. This get ask for user input to make changes to the page. And so just building out some HTML, this would be useful. But in the next screencast, I'm going to show you how we can actually do a similar thing using the functions we've been using and the methods we've been using throughout the rest of the class. So we're going to go ahead and end this one here and move on to the next one.